If you want to be more engaging with your content, more engaging with your stories, more engaging with your webinars, more engaging all around, and be able to tell a story that converts, a story that engages, a story that brings people in and makes them automatically feel like you get them and you know them, well, this episode is for you. We're going to talk about that, plus how to integrate into webinars, create effective webinars, and more. We have a special guest, and I'm really excited. So if that's interesting to you, well, keep on listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, we have one of our most returning guests. Honestly, I don't know if today's guest or James Wedmore are the most returning guests, but top two, at least, minimum, top two returning guests. And there's a good reason for it. Today's guest, top two is better than top three and top four. So you could be number one. I don't know, but I'm really excited for today's conversation. And the reason why, and today's guest is Colin Boyd. And the reason why I love having Colin on the podcast is I feel like we're twinsies when it comes to what we do. We just do it in sort of different contexts. And so I talk a lot about messaging, and I talk a lot about communication, and in the form of like marketing and just throughout your entire brand, just generalized messaging and communication. Colin has a very similar specialty, but focuses more on how to sell from stage and webinars and how to create stories, AKA another form of messaging and communication to create more connection and higher conversion. So we always just have great conversations on this topic. So Colin, I'm excited to have you back, man. Welcome.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to jam. I'm not as cool as you today. I don't have my hat on backwards.
Yeah, you know, if you want to, we can take a break. You can go get a backwards hat. And you want to know the honest truth about the hat? Because I don't wear it all the time. The honest truth is I've been so tired in the mornings that I get up. I get up. My wife and I will trade off who takes the kid to school. So when it's not my day, dude, I sleep until like 9:30, and we have a sales call at 9:30. Half the time I'm like on my phone, no camera, hair done or hair not done. And then I'm like, I'm just going to throw a hat on because I have a podcast with Colin and I don't want to do my hair. I don't want to get dressed. So that's
well, you look good, bro. You look good.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right. Well, let's hop in. You have this process called conversion story. And this is something that I see people mess up on all the time when they tell story. The number one mistake that I see personally is people just tell a story in their brand or on a webinar or where it may be for the sake of selling a story. They're like, oh, Russell Brunson tells a story in his webinar framework, or this person told this. So I'm going to tell a story. And number one, they don't know why they're telling a story. They don't know how to make the story compelling. They don't know how to build connection off of it. They don't know why they're telling a story. So it doesn't really jive with the rest of the presentation. So can we just dive into what a conversion story is and kind of maybe the framework around it?
Yeah, well, for me, one of the big mistakes that coaches and course creators make is when they're doing a presentation, whether that's a webinar or a virtual event or a live event, they're doing a presentation. The story they tell is usually their origin story. And I had this revelation several years ago, and it was actually you and I that got together that came up with the angle of it. So I appreciate you, Brandon.
Yeah.
Is this idea of a conversion story. And so I was working on this angle, and I knew there was something off with how people were sharing their story. And I was kind of going to teach on storytelling, but it was a unique way, but I didn't have a language for it. And I know you had a conversation with you, and we came up with this idea of a conversion story. And so the difference is that for most people, they tell their origin story, and their origin story is the story that, you know, is really like the journey of how they got into business, how they got into doing what they're doing. But it's a lot more generalized. And a lot of the time people will share different stories at different times. And that's good from the sense of people will get to know you. They'll get to know a little bit about your journey, about who you are, where you grew up, what sort of education you have, what sort of qualifications you have, all that sort of stuff. Right. But it's also like, you know, somewhat mediocre in terms of its power.
Mm.
And so the difference is between an origin story and a conversion story is your conversion story is the story that when you tell it, it authentically moves your audience towards wanting to work with you. And so the reason why this works so well is because the conversion story is that story that best articulates the transformation that you went through, but it's also the transformation that you help people with.
Mm.
And so for me, I will tell a story about my first presentation that I ever did. And what I find is a lot of the times it's usually the first time you went through that transformation. The reason why that is, and this was the distinction I made recently, was the reason why you tell the first transformation is because where is the client usually? They're right before the first time.
Right.
And
Yep.
so a great conversion story, when it's told well, the audience puts themselves truly in your story. And so they're listening to your story, they're enjoying it, they're captivated by it, but they're also going, wow, that's kind of my story as well. Like I
Yeah.
really resonate with that. And so that's one distinction of the conversion story. And just as a side note, I just think people don't tell enough stories in
Yeah.
presentations. I will just say that as a side note. I get a lot of feedback from people saying, Colin, I actually want to get straight into my content and I don't tell
Right.
a story. And so I just want to make an encouragement out there for everyone. Just throw a few more stories into your presentations and it really just adds a lot more engagement into them no matter what.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that I teach too is like when I teach something on a webinar or a presentation or anywhere really, I don't assume that the audience is just going to believe me because I'm talking. So when I teach something, I like to even tell a story after I'm done teaching that proves what I just taught, number one, works, but also gives sort of a picture or a context of how it works, why it works. Like I love doing that as well. I want to hop onto or jump back to one thing you said, which was when you tell the story, you're usually telling the story of right before the story of your experience before you overcame it, but it's also the same thing that they're kind of dealing with. Is that this, like when you come up with a conversion story, is that essentially you sort of figuring out, okay, here's the problem I solve and here's the problem I can help people with. And here's the story of me overcoming that problem. Is that another way to phrase it?
Yeah, I think that could definitely help your audience in understanding how it works. Definitely is what's the problem they've got, what's the problem you overcome, and then how did you do it? For me, I can share my example of mine, and
Sure. Yeah, let's
we
do
can
it.
kind of break it down. When I first started my coaching business, I remember I was doing a life coaching diploma, and I was really excited about running a coaching business. I was working as an employee at the time, and I had these big dreams of building a life that was meaningful, that was had freedom to it, but also I was able to make a lot of money. And the problem was is that I wasn't making a lot of money. I had very little freedom.
Yeah.
And like a little bit of meaning. And I remember I had about 6 months into my coaching business, I basically had I call it half a client. It was one of
Mhm.
those clients that like pays you every other month and turns up every other session. And it was like just a headache. And I remember thinking, I don't think this is going to work. And what happened was in this place of discouragement, I actually got a phone call from a friend, and it was in a network that I was involved in, and he had a speaking engagement coming up that he couldn't do. And I'd
Mhm.
never spoken before in public. I'd spoken at college during my business degree. I'd spoken at school. I'd spoken at like a local church group on occasions, but nothing professional. I wasn't a professional speaker or anything. And so I
Right.
was so nervous about this presentation, and it was for a university group. And I remember coming into that evening just absolutely freaking out, thinking, will they like my content? Will they actually believe that I'm good at what I do? Will I be credible enough? Am I going to basically be booed off the stage? All the stuff. Am I actually old enough to do this? Because I was quite young at the time. Like these were all the stories that I was telling myself.
Yeah.
That evening, the event organizer came up to me and he's like pumped that I'm there, which I'm very overwhelmed by. And he's
Yeah.
like, Colin, this is the biggest night we've ever had. We've got 137 people in this room and you're the speaker. We're really excited. And for me, this is like the worst news of the night because
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, great, I'm going to look like an idiot in front of their biggest audience.
Mm.
And I presented that evening, and I made an offer. Actually, at the end, I made it was a free offer, but it was actually an irresistible offer. I didn't realize it at the time. And so that night I spoke, made an offer, and out of the 137 people, about 125 of them gave me their personal details. And then I followed up, and I ended up signing 12 full-time coaching clients from that. So I had a full deck of coaching within like the next 30 days. And then
Yeah.
HP called me. There was a director from HP in the audience. He called me and he said, "Colin, love the presentation. Could you speak at our next training day?" That ended up having 5,500 people. That was my first ever. That
Jeez.
was my first paid speaking engagement.
Oh
So I
my
went from
God,
137
man.
to 5,500. And I worked with HP for 10 years. I flew all around the world with them, did all their major conferences. But that was the first time for me realizing the power of one presentation.
Yeah.
And I ended up speaking for years on the speaking circuit, and then transitioning to doing a whole bunch of presentations online now, because webinars and virtual presentations weren't really a thing. This was like 2009. It was like GoToWebinar was kind of there, but
Yeah.
people weren't really using it, and that's when and then it transitioned to online. So I think all of this applies to online as well, which is what we teach and use. But that was the revelation I had. It was like, wow, that in one experience I can literally change the trajectory of my life. And
Yeah.
so that's my journey.
I love it. I mean, and I love just listening to that through the lens of like, okay, I'm listening to Colin's conversion story right now. But what's really powerful about this is, even though I'm aware, okay, he's telling a conversion story, it's
Yeah.
like a story, but it's meant to, I'm still engaged in it. It's still pulling me in. And that shows the power of what you're talking about. It's like, even when I do presentations and I tell people, here's what I'm going to do messaging wise, and I still do it. And they're like, oh my God, it's still working on me. And I know what you're doing. I'm like, that's
It's
the
still
power of
working.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, great messaging. I kind of laughed and I wrote a note down when you said like I started my business for more time and freedom, and I didn't have like I had less time, less freedom. And I wrote down a note
That's
for like a
funny.
piece of content or a meme. It's like, are you really a course creator if you start your business for more time and freedom and have a period where you don't have any more? You have less than when you started. I think that's like it's like a patch of on. It's like initiation, like of
It
the course
is.
creator space. You start for time and freedom and you're pumped up, and then you quickly realize, man, I have less time and less freedom now. At least in the beginning. I think
Oh,
that's
it's so
every
true.
story.
It is a part of the journey. And I think, like, if we reflect on my story, like that language was used on purpose, because
Yeah.
firstly, that's how I felt, but it's
Right.
also how almost everyone else feels.
Right.
And so
Exactly.
how the conversion story works is, and this is, everyone has to do it for their own story and their own audience, is that you take your story and you, exactly what you teach, like you put the messaging in there that the
Right.
audience is going to go, they're going to automatically, unconsciously go, wow, this person really understands who I am, because
Yeah.
they've been through what I've been through, and not been through physically everything you've been through, but emotionally, mentally
Mm,
wrestled with the challenges. And that's a distinction I've made recently as well, is that people put themselves in your story not when they hear the visual side of things or what you were doing physically, etc. They put themselves in your story when they experience the mental and emotional dissonance and challenge you're experiencing.
that's a great, um, what's the word I'm looking for?
Distinction.
Distinction. There you go. Thank you.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, as you're kind of going through that, I was kind of sort of thinking of like my story and, like living with the in-laws and the struggle. And you're totally right,
Mm.
because it's not like, because people always resonate with that so much, that
Yes.
story. They're like, oh my gosh, I resonate with that. But they're not in the physical situation of living with their in-laws, working from an extra bedroom. But you're right. It's the emotion that I felt, the struggle, like things not working. The context for them is a little bit different, but they still connect.
Yes.
And the most important thing, because this is why I love having conversations with you, because we're so similar in how we do things. But that's what I say with messaging is like, you want to talk to the unconscious or the subconscious. And what that means, at least the way I talk about it, is that people don't have to think. They have automated reactions or automated connection. It's just an automated thing. And when you have a
Yes.
really good conversion story, that connection point and sort of desire and demand should be automatic. Like they shouldn't have to think about, oh, do I like this guy? Do I not? Like it's just an automatic like, whoa, this guy totally gets me. So I love that.
And
I
I
do
think on
want
that, like with
to,
unconscious, the unconscious mind, I mean, the unconscious mind learns in story, it learns in
yeah.
metaphor, it learns in imagery. And so it automatically speaks to the unconscious mind when you tell story, metaphor, etc. That's why any great therapist will use metaphor, will use
Yeah.
story in their therapy and tell stories that sometimes you feel are random, but
Right.
then at the end of them, you're like, oh my gosh, that story just changed my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, love that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's another thing we use is metaphor and analogies and all sorts of
Mm,
stuff. I mean, it's like the golden ticket in my mind as far as like
mm,
messaging and the way, kind of like what you're talking about too, is I think people take the approach when it comes to webinars and when it comes to selling and it comes to like creating content, they take the approach of what I call like the encyclopedia approach, which is let me deliver all of this great information. And then you find that like you're just teaching for 60 minutes on a webinar. And then people are either like thinking, oh, this is great, I got everything I need, or they're just overwhelmed by the amount of information. And I tell people, like, think of your content and your webinars more of like a TED talk, like still very educational, engaging, but it's not as boring. It's way more engaging, and it allows people to be like captured. And I think that's what you're
mm.
talking about here is like creating these stories and integrating into content, integrating into webinars, and you really just build this relatability, relevancy, connection automatically. But again, it's engaging. And when you have more story incorporated into webinars, you don't need to come up with 60 or 45 minutes of information. Because I hear that from people all the time. Like, how do I create 45 minutes of training? Like, you're not supposed to. You
Yeah.
shouldn't. It shouldn't be that way, So my question to you, I have two questions for you. Well, let's go into the first one. The first one is, how do we create a conversion story? Are there elements? And then number two, where do we integrate that conversion story to like maximize our impact or sales or whatever? So can we hop into like how to start creating a conversion
Yeah.
story?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a first off, I think everyone should create a story bank. And so everyone should be noticing different experiences that they're having in their life and just jotting them down. That could literally just be in like an Evernote or even like a, in the iPhone. Um, you should listen to this, Brandon, on the iPhone.
Yeah.
I know you're on
Why not an Android, man?
I think iPhone's got like a notes app. I'm not sure if Android has that capability with the notes yet. No, I'm
Yeah.
joking. I always give Brandon crap about
Don't
trying.
worry. Everyone does. Everyone does.
um, so yeah, in a notes app, right? Just capturing stories is the first thing. In terms of your conversion story, there are three things you're looking for in a conversion story. You're looking for a moment of connection.
Mm,
And so your story should start with a place where there is some vulnerability.
yeah.
You're not invincible yet. You're Clark Kent. You're mere human, and your story should capture a point in your life where it answers the question: are you like me, or do you understand me and the challenges I'm going through? And so the first part of your story should capture that. The second part of your story will lead towards the credibility, which
Yeah.
is the invincibility. It's the Superman, right? And so obviously you have to go on that journey from connection to credibility, and there's going to be ups and downs and all that sort of stuff, and there's going to be challenges, there's going to be internal and external difficulties, etc. But then eventually you get to a place of credibility where you've actually proven something, you've done something.
Mm,
Now that alone is a great story. Like that is a classic kind of rags to riches story, or a difficulty to overcoming it and having dynamic life story. The secret sauce to a conversion story is that it also integrates a core premise. And how this works is it integrates, or it aligns with one very specific idea. And that is the core premise. And the core premise is the one belief that your audience must understand or buy into in order to want to work with you, or in order to want to go to the next level. And so for me, my core premise is that you are one irresistible presentation away from the breakthrough you want in your business.
Mm.
And I noticed that in my life. I've noticed that in so many of my clients' lives, is like, you dial that one presentation in. Sometimes it will take you 3 or 4 times to get it right.
Right.
But once you dial that in, you can just keep delivering that same presentation over and over again, and keep building your business. Now, as you know, there's more around it. There's the messaging, there's the what are they thinking beforehand coming into it. Like,
Right.
which is why I love people to do your program and my program. Like, for me, it's like
Yeah.
it's both of them integrated. But my revelation was that, like, people think they need like 7 different topics and presentations and webinars. They don't.
Right.
They literally need one that works really well, and that can work for 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years. I've seen people run the same webinar for 4 to 5 years, and it still just converts and grows their business. And so,
Yeah.
in other words, that's my core premise, right? And
Yep.
so when you align your story with your core premise, then it comes to light. And the question that the core premise answers is there a path that I can follow?
Mm.
And so when you show the core premise, that's the path. You're not going into the details. You're not opening the encyclopedia of the path.
Right.
You're just revealing that there is a clear path, a golden brick road that you can follow to get a result that you want. So that's like the context, the framework of a conversion story. And yeah. So did you want to talk to that a little bit, and then we can go into the context of a webinar and a presentation?
Yeah. Let's do that. The path.
So in terms of the context of how it works in a presentation, for me, a conversion story usually fits in the first, 10 to 15 minutes. It's in the introduction.
Yep.
And a great presentation breaks down 3 things. It touches people's hearts right at the front end. So it has this sense of answering the question of, you are like me and you get me, and there's a reason why we're here. This is important, this conversation, and it's very relevant for us right now. And so it answers those questions, the introduction. That first 15 minutes, it should answer all of those questions. And that can be done with story, that can be done with speaking purely to their unconscious fears and desires and all those sort of things. And then you're going to transition to the content. And the content is not about teaching their minds, it's shifting their minds. And so for me, one of the distinctions is going, what must the audience believe, or what do they currently believe that they need to shift in their thinking in order to say yes to the next thing? I'll give you an example of this. I know for me, there was it was probably about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, during COVID, like probably a few of us, I was drinking a few drinks in the evening, few alcoholic drinks, right?
Yeah, so we're talking water, juice, like what?
Yeah, it wasn't just water.
Yeah.
It was like, it went from like 1 drink to like 2 drinks, then 3 drinks, then 4 drinks a night. And I just found myself like getting into that habit, and it was just so easy, right?
Right.
And I had this I got to this point, I kept on saying to myself, I've got to reduce my drinking. Like, this is not good for me. I could just tell in my mind. And I could stop for like a week, but I couldn't stop for anything longer than that.
Right.
And I read a book by a woman called Annie Grace. It's called Your Naked Mind. And what's fascinating is she actually takes all of the beliefs that people have about alcohol and just reframes them and shows evidence for them. So basically, she shifts people's minds, and she doesn't even say stop drinking. Like, she doesn't even like tell you to stop. But I found that after I read that, I literally just automatically stopped. And actually, I literally didn't have a drink for 1.5 years after that. I have an occasional drink now, but it's like, I don't have like this intense desire to drink anymore, which is what I had, 2.5 years ago. And I couldn't stop it. Even if I stopped drinking for a month, I would still have that desire to go like, oh my gosh, I can't wait till the 30 days is up so I can have another drink. Where I don't have that anymore. And it was actually because of the wrong beliefs that I had. Your audience has those beliefs about your offer. Your audience has those beliefs about what you do. And until you shift those beliefs, they're not going to move towards your offer. And so for me, that's an example of, I just automatically and easily just moved quickly towards seeing the change I wanted to see without her even telling me what to do. I just automatically did it.
Right.
Because she removed the resistances. And so for me, really important part is shifting their mind. The third party is equipping their hands, and that is giving them some, a little bit of utility, a little bit of practicality of what to do, but not too much detail. The problem that most people face is they get into the process, they get into the
Mm.
steps, and if someone hasn't bought a program from you, the speed at which they become overwhelmed is a lot faster because the commitment is lower. And so the more commitment, the less overwhelm someone's going to have because they
Oh,
have the
yeah.
commitment to push through the overwhelm.
Right.
And so when there's low commitment, there is fast overwhelm. And when you get high commitment, the overwhelm reduces because they have this internal capacity to handle more, to commit to more, to go after more, and to work it out.
Yeah.
And so when you're delivering free stuff, I'm kind of, I'm actually teaching a little bit of the how, but not too much detail because I don't want to overwhelm everyone, right? Because
Right.
once again, this is a free podcast. And by the way, I will say, some people say, well, what's the point of free then? Free's so important because
Yeah.
free helps you to work out, do I like this person? Does this content resonate with me? Do I think they could actually help me? It's the dating process that you have to go through. I mean, you're not just going to ask everyone you see to marry you.
Right.
You want to date them. You want to get to know them. You want to make sure they're a right fit before you commit to them.
Yep.
And so it's still important. It's very important. And then the final piece is moving their feet. And so that is the offer itself. And for me, there's three types of endings. There is a direct offer where you actually ask someone to join, buy something. There is a soft sell. So the first one's a sharp sell. The second one's a soft sell, which is you get them to book a call or they download something for free. And the
Right.
third one is a no sell, which is just, focusing on a standing ovation or some sort of like movement or action at the end. And you
Right.
usually do a no sell if you're speaking at someone else's conference and you're not allowed to do a download or something like that. But usually if it's your own webinar, own presentation, you can do a sharp sell or a soft sell, depending on the price point.
Okay. Gotcha. And when we're doing webinars, when we're doing, let's just call it sell from stage. And
Yep.
let's just say there is going to be some sort of like
Offer.
pitch or offer or something, whether it's soft or just direct or whatever it may be. When it comes to the form of conversion story, are there specific areas within a presentation that you recommend using them? Like I know earlier I kind of mentioned like I like to use them after I teach something, and you also mentioned like people should have like the story bank, and people should also have multiple stories throughout a presentation. Like where are these like specifically plugging in to get the most like effective sort of talk?
Yeah. For me, I'll usually start with the idea. So, okay, there's a distinction here. A conversion story, I tell the story first and then share the idea. When I'm teaching, in the actual content part of things, I will usually share the idea and then tell the story. And the reason why I do that is because in teaching, you're helping people to understand. You want to be clear on a concept first, and then you want to give some meat around it. Where in a
Right.
conversion story, it's actually just your core story. So you don't need as much. You're not, if you were to teach a concept before your core story, it would kind of feel a bit almost contrived.
Yeah.
But if you have the concept at the end of a conversion story, it feels a lot more like congruent because it's gone into that point. Where when you're teaching, I think it's fine to just actually teach a point. Like I'll give you an example. One of the things that I teach is decision-based content, and it's kind of what you brought up. This idea of teaching the encyclopedia or teaching a very small thing. It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Did you have that growing up, like the Pizza Hut and things like that? You Domino's, Domino's all you can eat, and you walk out just feeling disgusting. And then, or a beautiful decadent meal, like something that is like beautifully balanced. It's well created. And I don't know about you. Have you had a few times, Brandon, where like you eat a decadent meal and then you want to swing in by a local Mexican restaurant on the way home because you're still hungry?
Yeah. I get like sushi sometimes too, but I get so pissed, man. It's like $100 meal and they bring out like a string bean and covered in sauce that looked good. I'm like, you MFers. Like,
You got me. You got me.
yeah,
But I mean, the concept is the fact that you're still hungry after it.
right.
Like,
Yep.
it's still like a sense of, okay, I want more. And so I think what people need to be conscious of is not drinking from the fire hose, right? Is giving
Mhm.
them a cup of water where they can taste it. They're like, okay, this tastes great. This is beautiful. This is nice, and I would love to have more. And so, but the concept is that we need to move from overwhelming content to decision based content. And for me, I live in California. I know you moved from California recently,
Mhm.
but I'm in Newport Beach, and I've lived here for about 7 years. And you can hear my accent. I'm Australian, right? For
Yeah.
about 2 years, 2.5 years, my wife and I talked about moving to the US, and we discussed it. We talked it over, and I remember like picking people's brains about it,
Yeah.
uh, and taking them out for coffee. People who'd done it before, who'd moved before. I researched on Google. I went on Reddit. I went all the places. 2.5 years later, after researching, I was more confused on how to actually move myself to the US than I was at the start.
Right.
And then one day I just said, you know what? Are we going to go or are we not? It was actually our mutual friend, James Wedmore.
Yeah.
I went to a mastermind event with him the first time I'd ever experienced his stuff. And I
Yeah.
went to Laguna Beach, and I came back, and I said to my wife, I was like, this is where we need to be for the next season
Mhm.
of our life. And so we just made a decision. I was like, we need to go. And then I hired an international immigration lawyer. Literally within, it was like 4 months. It was in between. He used to run like a quarterly event.
Yeah.
At the first event made a decision. We landed the week of the next event. We'd literally moved countries, set up a business, got immigration rights, all this sort of stuff within it was like 90 days. And I'd been thinking it over. My kids call it kerfuffling around for 2 years, 2.5 years on trying to research how to do it. And then I had just hired someone, followed their system, and got a result within 90 days.
Wow.
And so what I didn't need was more information. What I
Right.
needed was a decision. And it was
Yeah.
from that true decision where I paid money, and I hired someone who had a system, and I followed the system and got a result. And so when you teach, your audience don't need more information. They need enough information to know that you're good at what you do and that you can help them, etc. But they don't
Yeah.
need more information. They actually need to make a decision, and it's that decision that's going to change their life.
Mm. That's a really great distinction because I tell people there's two types of trust. It's like, yeah, there's the human to human trust or the connection sort of trust, but they also need to trust in your ability to solve their problem. And if they don't trust your ability to solve the problem, then they won't buy. And I think where a lot of people get stuck in is they think that if I just deliver more information, then it will build trust in my ability. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. And I think what you're talking about is like building that sort of trust where they can make that decision. And that decision is like, I trust this person's ability to help me with this problem. They understand it, they get it. I know they can do that. And that doesn't always happen by delivering more and more information.
Mm,
Right.
mm,
Would you say we're saying the same thing?
yeah, oh no, absolutely. Not like because it's so the whole that angle of where people say, "Oh, if you deliver great content," and people are going to say, "Oh my gosh, if I get this for free, imagine what I'm going to get when I pay."
Yeah.
That is not necessarily what happens. What
No.
happens is if you deliver too much overwhelming content in a webinar or in a presentation, they will say, "This was great. Let me try and get all. I feel good." It's like I've had the Domino's buffet, right? I've had the
Yeah.
all you can eat. Let me try to digest this for the next couple of months,
Yeah.
and then I'll come back when I feel a little bit more settled, because this has been very overwhelming. When I feel a bit more settled, then I'll come back and look at the offer again. And that's typically what happens. It's it's not, oh, this was great for free. I want to like imagine how much more I get when I when I pay money, because they
Yeah.
don't want more. They actually want less.
Yeah.
Um, because they're like, oh my gosh, if I pay, is this just going to be even more overwhelming? And
Right.
so we have to be careful of that's an old way of thinking, I think, in terms of delivering content
100%.
to convert.
Well, that's what I always look for. I look for these industry norms we've been told, and I'm like, which ones just don't really
Mhm.
work for people? And
Yeah.
that is one of them. Is like if you give out the best information, and I guess it's well. Let me rephrase, because when people say give out your best stuff for free, and then they're going to be like, oh, I wonder what the paid is. I think the problem is people never ask, what does best content mean?
Yes.
They just assume best content means more information, but
Mm,
more information doesn't mean best content. In fact, that's kind of what I built my business on, is like this idea that your best information, more information, how to's, tutorials, that's not what actually gets a conversion. It's not what's engaging. And I always use like Simon Sinek and Brene Brown and Gary Vaynerchuk. They're not sitting there just delivering huge amounts of information. Like most of it is exactly what you're talking about. It's like story that teaches, it's conversion stories, essentially sort of what they're doing. They're using thought reversals, perspective shifting stuff,
yeah.
they're using our stuff, dude. That's what they're doing.
We need to hit him up.
Yeah. Hey,
It's
knock, knock. You're using conversion story. I need a royalty, Simon Sinek.
sorry. Totally. I mean, you bring up something really, really important here, because I feel like the definition of most valuable content needs to be clear it needs to be contextualized,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're delivering a presentation, like when I think about my members of our program, when I'm delivering something in there, like I'm given SOPs, like there's like step by step, there's templates, they're like one click templates that they can download and implement. It's like every single how to thing that they will ever need to build that specific thing that we're teaching at that time is in the training. And
Yeah.
so that's what you should be delivering to your students. But to everyone who's more in the in the dating stage of working with you, if you give that, it's just going to completely overwhelm them. Now I will say
Right.
this, is that conceptual information can be just as valuable, if not more valuable, than practical information.
Mm,
And I mean, think about some of the greatest speeches of all time. Like, I think about like a Martin Luther King, I Have a
right.
Dream, right?
Right.
Did he go, okay, let me take you through the specific steps of how we're going to do this over this generation? He
Right.
didn't break steps down. He didn't go into like practical elements. He casted vision. He
Yeah.
shifted perspectives. He told story. He shared metaphor. He created pictures of different people interacting. Like he created those pictures, and was from that became pretty much the most famous speech in history. And
Yeah.
so you have to understand that valuable content isn't always hyper detailed practical step by step stuff. Valuable content is also perspective shifting, and
Yeah.
to be frank, that's what most people need when they first start out. They don't need all the steps yet. They need to get
Yeah.
the steps, but in the right order.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, we're preaching to the choir here, because I feel like,
Yeah.
again, this is why I love having you on, because we say the same, very similar things. And I always tell people, it's like they have to, like I said earlier, trust your ability to do it, and they also have to automatically like you and trust you. Those are like the first steps when it comes to selling anything. It's like it's building rapport, but it's like that building rapport is easy when it's one-on-one. But what you're talking about is how do we build that rapport in a bigger scale, like a mass scale at the same
Mm.
time. And so, story and metaphors and all that stuff is a beautiful way to do it. And I actually believe the exact same thing you said, is like, they don't need to know the steps. They just need to know, like, what is the sort of pathway here? Like, is there a pathway? Do I trust this person? Do I trust their ability? Do I get it? Is there a solution? And then you get them to a point to make a decision. Now, obviously we need some sort of information in there, but like, if you're
Yes.
just going to create a webinar and just pile information in there, it's probably not going to work. In fact,
Yeah,
if
and
you've
it's
been doing that, it
boring.
probably hasn't been working.
It hasn't been working. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. If it hasn't been working, it's a great indicator that you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to start, because then you can start to go, okay, this isn't working. Like I need to do it slightly. I need to do it different. And it has to be different enough to get a different result.
Right.
Because the definition of frustration is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Definition of
Right.
insanity. But for me, frustration is you're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And so sometimes people will say, webinars don't work anymore. I
Right.
mean, we've got a lot of friends. I run a lot of webinars. You run a lot of webinars and virtual events and stuff, and they drive our business. They create
Yeah.
millions of dollars a year in our businesses, and like they do work. It's just that people just don't work them right.
Well, and I think part of the problem today is that, it's also has to do with like competition and market saturation. It's like, 10 years ago when people were using webinars, you could get away with like information stuff
Yeah,
because you're one of the only choices. So it's kind of like,
yeah,
well, I have a problem and I only have two choices to go after. So I'm just going to go after this person. And so then you start learning from people that that's what they did 10 years ago, but the market isn't the same anymore. And
mm,
so when you do what they did and you implement it into a different environment, it's not going to have the same effectiveness. So it's not that the strategy is not working. It's the communication within. It's how you're doing the strategy that isn't allowing you to stand out. And that's what I tell people all the time is like, look, I'm not the only messaging expert out there. And Colin, you're not the only person that does what you do either. But people come to their own conclusion that we are in our own space. Why? Because of the way we teach, the stories that we use, the way in which we communicate. And people go like, wow, I've never heard that before. No one's ever connected those dots for me before. And then they're like, that person's in their own space. That's how we start to do it. At least from my perspective, is it's how you teach. And I tell people, and I think you would agree with this because we're kind of saying the same thing, is becoming a better teacher is what makes the biggest difference, at least for me in my business. And what you're talking about, in my opinion, allows people to be a better teacher. It allows you to pull in an audience. It allows them to grasp up. You're not overwhelming them. You're not like giving them information they can't implement on their own. You're becoming a better teacher. And
mm.
you can do that through story and all the stuff we talked about today.
Yeah. I feel like when people first start out, the reason I say this is because this is how I felt, was when I first started teaching and started speaking, I had this hang up around, I want to show people that I'm like smart, like I know what
Mm,
I'm talking about. I'm good at what I do. And in that desire, it was kind of misdirected because what happens is we end up creating content of where we're trying to prove something to someone,
right.
as opposed to come from the place of, I just deeply care about this audience. And I want to make sure that the content in this is the right content to get them unstuck to go to the
Mm,
next level. And when you come from that, because the first place for me was it's ego. It's not
yeah.
like a bad ego.
Right.
It's more just like I'm trying to almost protect myself. And I think when we first start, that's where we come from. Like I was really worried about, like, would I be good at what I do? Like, would they like my stuff? And that's part of the journey. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you shift that perspective of going truly, who is my audience? What are their deep challenges and deep issues that they're going through? And what do they want to achieve? And then what's the content that's going to help them get unstuck? And then if they're a right fit, because my goal is not to have everyone buy my program. I don't want
Right.
everyone to buy my program. Like,
Right.
not everyone's going to be a right fit. But I also don't want to minimize or reduce, if they're a right fit, I want them to join my program because
Yeah.
I know I can freaking change their life.
Right.
And so I want to make sure that I'm maximum in effectiveness of getting the right people to join my program, but I also don't want everyone to join my program because that's not going to work well either.
Yeah, I think a lot of people need to take that sort of perspective. I hear all the time, like even people are like, "Oh, my webinar didn't work," and I look at their numbers, and I'm like, "Your numbers are great," and they just have
Mm,
these expectations of like, "Well, I should have been higher. I want to help everyone." I'm like, "That's not the goal. The goal is not
mm.
to do that. It's to help the right people, the people
Yeah,
that actually need it, the people that are ready for it." So
yeah.
I love that. Well, Colin, I appreciate you having you come today and share all this wisdom with the audience. Is there anything that you feel like we didn't get a chance to cover that would be really valuable for the audience? I feel like we
Um,
covered a lot.
it was good, dude. That was solid.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I know you have a free training and presentation coming up. Do you mind telling the audience about what it is? And we'll give a link so they can register and join. So again,
Yeah.
if you're listening, you're like, this is great. I want to learn how to do this conversion story, how to create the webinars, how to sell from stage, how to pull people in, all of that stuff. What's the title of it and how
Yeah.
can they get it and what's included?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've resonated with the content we've talked about today and you're fascinated in going deeper and you want to build a presentation that could drive your business forward, I'm running a training series. It's a workshop series. We're going to go step by step through the process from all the way from installing the right mindset to what conversion content looks like in a presentation and creating decision-based content, and then the whole pathway and how you can actually do that and build a business around using webinars and presentations and so forth. And so the training is called Selling from Virtual and Live Stages. And yeah, it's a multi-part training series. It's a step-by-step process that I'm taking people through. And it starts on the 29th of January, 2024. January 29th is the first training. There will be replays available for a limited time, but yeah, I'd recommend you. If you resonate with me, you like this flow, you want to learn about your conversion story, go deeper in all this sort of stuff, that's the series that's going to help you.
Cool. Awesome. So guys, if you want to register for that, all you need to do is go to brandonlucero.com/stage, STAGE. Almost forgot how to spell stage. So go over to brandonlucero.com/stage. And look, there, as you guys know, if you've been in my ecosystem for a while, you know, there's not very many people that I promote or come on here and tell you about the free trainings. There's just like maybe 3 people a year, and Colin is one of those people. So again, I cannot recommend Colin enough. He has helped me tremendously in my own stuff, my own stories, my own presentations. And so head over to brandonlucero.com/stage, grab that training, and send me a message. Let me know what you think as you guys start to go through it. January 29th is the first day. So head over there, register, brandonlucero.com/stage. And Colin, thank you again, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, mate, it's a pleasure to be on here, and I trust it was helpful for the audience. Hope it was.
Yep, I'm sure it was. It was for me. All right, guys, if you have not left a review on Apple, is it Apple? Yeah, on Apple.
Yeah, Apple.
iTunes, head over there, leave me a review. I love reading those, and I will see you all next week for another episode. Take care, everyone. Hey, guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested. And thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.